if if there's anyone who has a problem with like the recording side of things, please let me know and I'll edit it out later on. And like, by designing the students. So yeah, Hayu, I think we are eager to hear what you have to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neha. Thank you for having me here, and I'm very happy to talk about the processing, memory processing, storage, which are all data-centric architectures, and also about the data-intensive applications and the core design between software and hardware. So the talk is about from microarchitectures to systems, design the holistic data-centric architectures for real-world applications. So nowadays we have really a lot of data, like gene data and video, photograph, a lot of data every year created and consumed and stored. So here is a figure showing the data growth in each year, and it's already achieved 175 zettabytes. So how might this data be useful, right? So we need really a lot of modern data intensive applications, because only the data doesn't make sense. We cannot find the useful information from the data itself. We need some data intensive applications to help us to find some insights inside. So the modern data applications are data driven, and they get the insights from the big data, and then they make decisions based on the insights get. For example, it's well known that we have large language models, and we need to train it to get information from the big text data. For example, it's like 45 terabytes for GPT-3, and then we can understand and then generate the language. At the same time, we also have a lot of the genome analysis, and the data is even bigger than the large language model. It can get information from massive reference genomes. For example, it's more than 2.5 ppb for the cancer genome data analysis. And then through these data-intensive applications, we can analyze the individual genome to check the cancer existence. So basically, we have data processing bottlenecking nowadays, because the first generating data is cheaper than processing data. Here is a quick example for you. Maybe you can fast understand the situation. It's like when previously we don't have the smartphones, and when we take pictures, we use the physical cameras to take pictures, and we need to consider a lot before we take picture, because the cost is really high. But nowadays we have the smartphones, and when we take pictures with smartphones, we don't really care a lot, and we just take as many pictures as we want, and then later on we select the pictures. So the world has changed really fast, and generating data now is cheaper than processing data. I have more examples here for the genome analysis. So the green line is the cost for the generating data, and the blue line is cost for processing data. As you can see, before the 2007 year, it's actually similar. The cost of generating data and cost of processing data is quite similar. And then we have a development in the technologies of sequencing. Then the cost of generating data is much lower compared to the cost of processing data. This kind of scenario, not only in the genome processing, but in many areas, like what I said before, when you kind of taking pictures, right? And another side is like generating data is much faster than processing data. This also applied for the picture generating we use nowadays for the smartphones. We have more advanced technologies for generating data like pictures and videos, but at the same time, the processing is not as fast as the generating. And here is another example for the genome analysis. When we generate the genome, it's much faster than when we want to do some analysis on this data, right? So basically, this summarizes the data processing bottleneck nowadays, which is generating data is cheaper and generating data is faster compared to processing data. So then we have the problem when we run all of these data intensive applications in the traditional computer, where we have the separate computing units and memory units. So nowadays we have, for example, our laptop and the clusters, we have the CPU or GPU, let's say, are separate from the main memory and storage. and they connected via the off-chip connections. And the first problem is that there's a really large amount of data movement between the computation units, central computation units or GPUs, and the memory units or storage units. And this large data amount of movement will cause a lot of performance, energy, security problems between the computation units and the memory units. And the second problem is that there's a very limited data access parallelism, which kind of decrease the performance when we transfer the data, because there's a very limited number of pings. For example, there's only 200 pings in the DDR4 DRAM, right? So the first problem of data movement and access is the performance bottleneck. Here is an example of the data movement access of traditional computer architecture when we executing data-intensive applications in the Google data center workloads. Here is a performance figure that shows the benchmarks. This is like this much benchmarks included Gmail's things and also Google search. And you can see that half of the cycles are stored on the caches, meaning that we are waiting for the data to be accessed from memory, right? So basically, there's a lot of a large performance bottleneck when we have a lot of data movement between the CPU and the memory units. And another thing is energy bottleneck. And here is another example when you use the Google Doc, and when you scrolling up and down, you can see the data movement between the energy spent on the data movement is much larger than the energy spent on the computing, right? And this research showed that 77% of the total energy consumption are spent on the data movement. Another problem when we have a data movement between the processing units and memory units is that the security issues, meaning that when they have the separate computation and the memory, we may have the side channel attacks to store data, steal data, or other security issues. So basically, there's a extensive data movement off-chip over the off-chip links significantly heightens the security risks, including these side channel attacks. So to conclude a little bit, so basically data movement and access problems cause significant performance bottlenecks, energy consumption waste, and also security issues. So you have been already maybe kind of experienced this when we open a lot of picture files or video files, because I do some video editing, and you will feel that the laptop you purchased 5 years ago maybe is already very, very slow when we have such large number of data files nowadays, right? And also at the same time, it consumes a lot of energy. It's like when you open a really big file, you can feel that maybe your laptop also already had the fans. It's like making the noise because it's generating a lot of energy, and there's an overheating problem and safety problem. At the same time, it will kind of having the environment problem as you consume a lot of energy. And at the same time, the data stolen problem when you transfer data over the off-chip links, like side channel attacks. So the solution to the data movement and access problem is the data-centric architectures. So basically, it's a new paradigm. And when you want to really solve this problem, you need to enable the computation with the minimal data movement and compute where the data resides, where it makes the most sense, right? So let me first give you an overview of data-centric architecture. Let's compare what we have in the traditional computer architecture, where we process the data in the centric processor, and the data-centric computer architecture, where we process the data where it resides. So in the traditional computer architecture, we have all the processing units accumulated inside the CPU. And for the main memory and for the storage, we only use them for storing the data, right? And for the data-centric computer architecture, for the main memory and the storage, not only have the data, but also have some processing units. inside it to help to process the data inside the memory or inside the storage. So here is a comparison when we have a lot of data inside memory and storage. So in the traditional computer architecture, we need to transfer all of the data slowly of the off-chip over the off-chip links from the memory storage to the CPU, and then we process the data, right? However, in the data-centric architecture, we can process some of the data or most of the data inside the memory and inside the storage. And then if there's a need, we can compute the rest of the computation enabled in the CPU, right? But this already, as you can see, the data is already, compared to the traditional one, the amount of data that need to be processed by the CPU is already very small amount of data. And it can be easily transferred through the off-chip links. So this is the high-level comparison of the data-centric architectures and the traditional computer architecture. And actually, the processing memory or processing near memory is not a new idea. It has been proposed very many years ago. It's like there's a paper published in 1969, which is called logic in memory arrays, that they already want to integrate some processing unit inside the memory. However, why does not a big achievement in the old age? I think there's many aspects. The first thing is that at that time, the technology is not that advanced, meaning that we don't really have that amount of data need to be processed inside the memory. And at the time, the technology of memory is also not really good. We need to, when we integrate the computing resources inside the memory, the cost of this integration is really high. So actually there are many issues, and but this high-level idea is quite kind of makes sense because we reduce the data movement between the memory and the processing units. And then why it becomes popular now, why there's a lot of in-memory and storage computation nowadays. So I list several things here, and it is a credit to Professor Onomutsu, this slide. So we have a really huge demands of from the application and system. First of all, it's the data access bottleneck, as I explained before, and also the energy and power bottlenecks, right? There's a lot of data movement energy dominates the computation energy, because we have really advanced computing units, while at the same time, the memory is not really developing as fast as the processing units. This is also known as the memory wall. And also we need all at the same time, meaning we need the performance, energy, and the sustainability, right? Usually we focus, when we do accelerators, we focus a lot of performance because performance is quite straightforward. But at the same time, the energy is also very important, right? So we want to move data less and save the energy. And at the same time, we can improve all of the metrics by minimizing the data movement. And the second thing is that there's huge problems with the memory technology, as I explained. There's the memory technology scaling is not doing well. There will be some errors or some issues when you scale the memory technology. You want to make it more dense. And many scaling issues demand intelligence in memory. Also, the emerging technologies can enable new functions inside the memory. For example, the non-volatile memories, right? They can provide some new characteristics in the memory technology. And so basically, if we don't have the in-memory and storage computation, all of the problems kind of like we want to improve, solve these problems, overcome these challenges. The design kind of like squeezed to in the middle. It's very limited, right? Very limited thing that we can do. So that's why the in-memory and in-storage computation is quite popular nowadays. So here is the overview of the data-centric architectures. One is the processing in memory. It's kind of popular ones. One is called processing in memory. One is called in-storage processing. Of course, we also have the processing in cache, meaning processing in the SRAM. But in this talk, we majorly focus on the processing in memory because this is the biggest bottleneck nowadays, and we have really a lot of data movement between the memory side and the CPU, the GPU side. Also, there's also a lot of research kind of focusing on the SRAM, processing in SRAM. That also makes sense because you can really like save a lot of time on chip and reduce the energy consumption when we have some edge devices, right? But here we mainly talk about the processing in memory and in storage processing. So one is called PIM. There's also other names like computing in memory, SIM, and in-memory processing, IPM. They have many different names, but they all mean the similar thing, which is processing in memory. And why we call it in storage processing instead of storage processing in the storage, because it doesn't sound well. If we have processing in storage, then the abbreviation is piece. It doesn't sound like a good thing, right? So that's why we call it PIM and ISP most of the time. And in the PIM, we have the processing near memory, which we integrate some small processing units very close to the data. And at the same time, we have the processing near flash, where we integrate some processing units, or we utilize some processing units inside the storage to help with some computations, some simple computations, some light computations, right? And at the same time, we have the processing using memory, where we involve the memory cells directly in the computation. This is fundamentally different compared to the processing near memory. Processing near memory is like we move the processing units, offload some processing units to the inside the memory. But processing using memory, and also we have processing using storage, using flash, is totally different kind of technology or method. I will talk about it a little bit detail in later. And so here is the taxonomy of the PIM and ISP. There's 4 important things. First of all, we have the nature of the computation, which is either using or near memory. Using memory is using the operational properties of the memory structures. And near memory is we add some logic very close to the memory structures, right? And the second one is technology. We can enable them into different technologies, like processing in flash, processing using flash, and DRAM, SRAM, and also there's these are traditional memory units that we have, and there's also emerging memory technologies like RAM, MRAM, FERAM, and PCM. And there are also new integration technology like 3D integration, right? So basically, the second important thing for the PIM and ISP is technologies. And the third one is location, meaning where we do this processing, data processing. We can do either in the sensors, inside the memory. We can do in the cold storage, hard disk, SSD. We can also do in main memory, which is quite popular nowadays, because it has quite a lot of benefits. And also we can do inside the cache, which is currently SRAM, and the registrar, but we may benefit less compared to processing inside the main memory, right? And we can do it also in the memory controller and over the interconnects inside the memory. Yeah? There's a lot of locations we can do the processing near the data. And the fourth one is functionality, meaning that what kind of functionality of the processing units that we offered for the processing inside memory or in storage processing. Currently, we have some PIM and ISP support MVM operations, which is the matrix multiply the vector operation, and which is dominant operations inside the large language models, right? So we have also the string matching operations, which is the kind of popular operations inside the genome analysis, also very popular inside the machine learning applications, and also the bulk bitwise operations. So a tuple of these four determines the PIM or ISP type, meaning that when we describe ISP or PIM type, describe these four things, right? And actually, one system can combine multiple PIM or ISP types inside one single system. So basically, there's a lot of design space when we explore in the processing memory and in storage processing. Okay. So nowadays we have a lot of companies focusing on the PIM processing memory. For example, the hybrid memory cube, the 3D memory, and UpMem, and also the Samsung SK, and they also the Alibaba in China. They focus a lot on the processing in memory, but they majorly, it's like in the industry, they majorly focus on the processing near memory. As you can see in this chip, they have for example, here we have the memory units integrated on top of these processing units, and kind of accessing data via the very dense interconnects. And also here, the UpMem integrates a lot of DPU very close to the data, right? So they mostly focusing on the processing using memory, near memory, because it kind of compared to the processing using memory, which I will introduce later, they require less change to the memory units. They just add some small units very close to the memory units currently. And another thing, this is some examples of processing near memory, which we integrates the processing units close to the memory units and then benefits from the high internal memory bandwidth, like the UpMem. Here you can see the memory chip. Inside the memory chip, there's a processing unit. And the small processing units integrated into the memory units to benefit from the internal bandwidth. And also here is another example of 3D stacked PIM HBM, where it stacks the processing units inside the logic die and accessing the memory via the 3D TSVs. So these are kind of things focused mostly by the industry. Also the research, they also do research on the processing near memory. And there's another technology, which is processing using memory, very popular in academia, because it really kind of like changed the way that we do the computation and processing. We do the computation and storing the data. So for the processing using memory, like here is an example of processing using DRAM, we directly use the memory cells involved in the computation. Here is an example, like the four things that we defined earlier. The nature is using, and the technology is DRAM, location is memory, meaning that we do all of the computation inside memory, not all of the processing memory computation inside the memory. And the functionality nowadays, we can support some like bulk bitwise operations and some copy operations. So basically, here are some pictures, some papers that you can read to get more information. I won't go through the details. They kind of play with these physical things of between the memory cells and the voltages. So as you can see, here is an example of the in DRAM and all triple low activation through the triple low activation to do some and all operations. We have the 3 cells ABC, and then when they are activated, it's connected to the bit line, and then the voltage changes. Basically, we can down the AND or OR, depends on the reference of the voltage. And through this play with these physics things, we can get the result of the computation. So basically, this computation is done using the memory cells. It totally changed the way of we doing the computation in the digital. So it used the analog, right? It used the analog signals to do the computation. And of course, there's more examples. That's only one simple example to give you intuition that why processing using memory is quite different and why it can be useful. And here we have the DRAM-based processing using memory to support bulk bitwise copy and ignition, or make it all zero, or bulk bitwise and or not majority, nor and NAND. And also it can provide some true random number generations, physical uncloned functions, and more complex computations using lookup tables. So these are still like in research, and you can develop more operations supported by the processing using memory by exploring these physical, playing with these physical things. And it can do all of the computation at a very low cost. So, okay, here is an example of the processing using NVM. It's the high-level idea is quite similar to the processing using DRAM, but they have different characteristics. So NVM, they use the DRAM, they use the capacity to store the data, and NVM, they use the level of the resistance of the cell to store the data. For example, here is a 4x4 NVM array, and we have the resistance to represent the data stored inside it. And if you want to do the computation, we can apply some voltage on the watt line and then sense the current on bit line through the Kirchhoff's law. And here is the result that I sensed. The result of sensing this current is actually equals to the result of using this vector multiply the vector stored in the RAM, right? So basically, if you want to do this vector multiply matrix operation, you firstly store this matrix inside this NVM-based array, and then you convert this input into the voltage, and then apply them on the watt line. And through this, you sense the current on bit line, which the sense operation is actually the finish the operation of doing the computation of vector multiply the matrix. So this is much more efficient compared to you read all of these data to the CPU and then do the computation in the digital way. And this is in the analog way, right? So processing using NVM is performs in situ analog computation by exploring the physical laws, such as the Kirchhoff's law. So here's an example that I explained in the previous slide. And by doing this, let's assume that we have really a lot of vector matrix multiplication when we need to do, which is very common inside the machine learning applications or large language model applications, right? When we need to do, let's say, 1 million vector multiply matrix multiplication, in the processing using memory, we can do all of these 1 million calculations parallelly in, for example, 1,000 nanoseconds. However, in the traditional computer architecture, we need to firstly read all of these data to the CPU. For example, it takes 1 second, and then perform the calculations, takes 2 seconds, and then write data back to the memory. So processing using memory really can be 1 million times faster than traditional computer architecture, focusing on a very simple operation. But I will talk about the limitations later. But of course, it's not cannot achieve 1 million times faster compared for the real applications, right? Because there's a lot of other operations that need to be done. But for single operation, as you can see here, it's really powerful. And then I summarize some challenges of designing the data-centric architectures. So when you have a real-world data-intensive applications, the first challenge is like which data-centric architectures, microarchitectures should you choose? Is processing near memory or processing using memory? or storage processing or processing using flash. And then how to design the microarchitectures to meet the application needs, right? So if you're using the processing near memory, what kind of processing units should be integrated and how? And if using the processing using memory, what kind of processing using memory units should be used and designed? You can also design new processing using memory units for the new operations that you want to focus on or you need, right? And how to integrate the data-centric microarchitectures with the general processors. Because the computations, or let's say the functionality of the PIN is quite limited compared to the general processors, right? It's not all of the computation can be done inside the processing using memory units or processing inside storage units, right? There's still some operations need to be done inside the general processors. Then how can they cooperate with each other? So accelerating the data.
Are you?
Yes.
I have a quick question. So basically, you're saying that the interfacing, like we can basically consider the processing and memory architecture as an accelerator, but it's like we would have like sort of a heterogeneous system where it is connected to CPU to complete the entire pipeline, and there will be some interface and like sort of interface between the two.
Yes, exactly. Because now, currently, we don't really, current technologies, we cannot really support all of the operations. Like, for example, the processing near memory, the processing units is quite weak compared to the CPU. We can sometimes compute some fixed numbers. We cannot really support floating point numbers. And for the processing using memory, there's more limitations. Like we can only support several operations that I mentioned before. There are many other operations that either need to be transferred to that kind of operations, or you need to do it in general processors. So it can be considered as a processor, as accelerator attached to the CPU, but at the same time, it's slightly different compared to the accelerator, because accelerator you still need to access the memory, and the connections, let's say the connections between the accelerator and the memory and the CPU versus the connections between processing using memory, processing near memory to the CPU is quite different. So it's like there's some similar things compared to the accelerators, but there's also some different things that we need to reconsider let's say, the way to access the memory.
Got it. And the other thing is, are these like programmable? And when I say programmable, like can we basically like reconfigure these like during an application, or like what are the general constraints?
Yeah, this is really good question, because we do have problems with the this processing in memory and the processing in storage architecture. There are two ways. It's like let's say two trends, not two ways, two trends. One is they focus really a lot on the very detailed fine-grained operations, and they still trust a lot on the traditional systems. One is that they really focus on the ASIC way, that we don't provide flexibility. They kind of like, for example, if we focus on the fine-grained operations, you don't need to change a lot for the let's say the system, but at the same time you get the less benefits compared to the ASIC. It's like the trade-off between flexibility and the performance gain and the energy savings. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before moving ahead? Great. Please continue, Haye.
Okay. Yeah, and integrated the microarchitecture with the general processors. Also, there's a very naive integration may lead to new overheads, meaning that if you don't integrate it in a kind of good way, then maybe the integration will become a bottleneck. Okay. And also how to map the data and schedule the tasks in the data-centric architectures. Because in the traditional computer architecture, we don't really need to consider about the data mapping. We manage the data in a kind of like a flexible way, and we provide the processors the data that like we kind of provide the service. However, for the processing using memory, processing near memory, we kind of like approaching the data in a very different, it's not a quite flexible way, in a quite limited way, let's say, meaning that when I want to compute this computation, I need to make sure that my data is nearby. It's not really far away from the computing units that I have, right? And how to solve the limitations in the current data-centric microarchitectures. Like there's errors in the analog computing. There's also limited functions supported by the processing near memory. Like we don't really can support a lot of floating point numbers of the computation. So yeah, there are many challenges of designing the data-centric architectures. Okay. And so the goal of the PIM and ISP research is actually from my side in my group is more designing the holistic data-centric architectures for the end-to-end real-world and data-intensive applications, where we arm at the enhancing the safety and the quality of life. And the key research directions is to do the software and hardware co-design across the computer design hierarchy to achieve the design goals. So I will explain more about the key research direction. So we have this software and hardware co-design because traditionally we have the computer design hierarchy like this. We have the algorithms, program language, system software, hardware interface, microarchitecture, logic, and device. And here is the software side, and below is the hardware side. And the traditional computer architecture refers to the software and hardware interface and microarchitecture. However, nowadays, and they treat the upper level and the down level as the black box. However, nowadays we have new challenges. For example, we have a lot of data-intensive applications. At the same time, we have new opportunities where we have the emergent technologies. For example, we have really advanced camera integrated in our phones. We can generate more and more data. And for the genome analysis, we have the second and third generation of genome technologies, which can sense the data, sequence the data much faster compared to the old technologies. So we have the challenges and the opportunity at the same time. So basically, the challenges put a lot of pressure on the traditional computer architecture design, and also at the same time, the emerging technology provide more opportunities for the architecture design. And then at the same time, these two sides, they affect each other, meaning that when we have more powerful technologies, we will develop more and more data-intensive applications. And at the same time, we want to support data-intensive applications. We kind of develop better technologies on the device side, right? So that's why we need to consider computer architecture in the expanded view, meaning that we need to also have the knowledge of the software side and have the knowledge of the hardware side. Then we can co-design across the hierarchy from the algorithms to the devices and specialized within design goals to optimize the computers in a holistic way. For example, Apple, they integrate a lot of machine learning accelerators inside their phones, right? Also in the laptops. So now we need to specialize some things, and you can get a lot of performance benefits if the application is really important, like machine learning applications and bioinformatics applications. So okay, so we have already talked about the data-centric architectures, the basics, and the motivation why we need that, and the current status of the memory processing storage, and also the challenges and the research goal and direction. Then I will give you two examples that we recently done in this area. One is about the genome analysis, and the other one is for the large language models. Then let's start with the first one, which is the holistic data-centric architecture and system for the nanopore genome analysis. Okay. So first, let me motivate a little bit about the genome analysis. We have the genome analysis fast and accurate is very important for the personalized medicine, surveillance of the disease outbreaks, predicting the presence of cancer genes, and understanding genetic variations, species, and evolution, right? And the genome analysis is the way that we can gain insights by analyzing data generated from the genome sequencing machine. So the procedure is that, for example, we have the DNA sample here, we put in the sequencing machine, and it's worth to mention that the current state-of-art genome sequencing machine can only sequence small and randomized fragments of the original DNA sequence, meaning that we cannot have the whole string, and these pieces are kind of randomized. We need to do some puzzles. So to do the puzzles on it is kind of like a genome analysis. So basically, sequencing machine generates these randomized subsequences, and we use our computer to do the analysis. And this is genome analysis to review the genome variants. Right? So let me introduce another technology that is a specific technology, which is called nanopore genome sequencing, where we have, which is a widely used sequencing technology, where we have this device, like it's a very small palm-sized device. And inside it has a nanopore. And when we analyze this DNA, the DNA goes through the nanopore and it will trigger some current change, the electricity changes. And then it's popular because it provides the portable sequencing devices like this. And it is very high throughput when do the sequencing. And it's also very cheap compared to the previous sequencing technology, and so on. So here is the pipeline of nanopore genome analysis. So firstly, we have the genome sequencing, as I introduced, and then we have these raw signal analysis, raw signal data. And we store them in the storage. And then we usually do the first is computing, it's called base calling, where we use the neural network to transfer these raw signals into the ACGTs that are human readable, piece by piece, like this. And then one subsequence is called a read after the translation, right? And after base calling, we store all of the reads inside the storage, and then continue with the next step, which is usually the read-call control, where we have, as you can see, the green one means the high quality, meaning that we can trust this machine. And the red one, meaning that the quality is not that high, and I cannot really trust the translation of this signal. And in the read-call control, we reject those, we discard these low-quality reads, and then store the high-quality reads in the storage. And then continue with the next step, which is the read mapping. And during the read mapping, I map these reads to the reference genome and discard those unmapped reads and store these mapped reads, and also at the same time the information of the mapping things, and then store the mapping results. Right? This is kind of like a quite common nanopore genome analysis pipeline. And we found two limitations. The first one is there's a large data movement between each steps. So basically, as I explained before, we have raw signals, then base calling the raw signals, translate them into reads, and then have read call control, and then transfer it into the high quality reads, and then we have the read mapping computation and these mapped reads. As you can see, after each step, we will discard some data, right? But we transfer all of the data step by step and this step by step is actually from the storage to the memory, and then from memory to the computation units. So here is the example, like how many data is transferred between these steps. And the second one is like we have really a lot of wasted computation done on the data that has been analyzed by previous steps. And we conclude that there's a considerable amount of computation on the useless data, either due to the low quality reads in these high quality read filtering, and or due to the unmapped reads. I mean, those reads cannot be mapped to the reference nodes. But all of this computation or all of this data has been transferred and has been analyzed in the previous steps. So these are the two limitations. And so the goal of this work is to efficiently accelerate the entire genome analysis pipeline while minimizing the data movement and the useless computation. And we perform a study to quantify the potential performance benefits. Results are normalized to the performance of GPU. First, we have the non-volatile memory-based PIM accelerators for the separate base calling and remapping. It can achieve 2.7 times speedup. And second, we assume there's no data movement between the accelerators of analysis steps. It can achieve 6.1 times speedup. And then we assume there's no data movement and no useless reads, meaning it's the ideal case. We can achieve 9 times speedup. So we propose GenePIP, which is the first holistic in-memory accelerator for genome analysis pipeline, including the base calling, read call control, and the read mapping steps. So GenePIP has two key techniques. One is the trunk-based pipeline, and the other one is the early rejection. First, let me talk about trunk-based pipeline, which enables the fine-grained pipelining of the genome analysis steps and process the reads at trunk granularity, which is the subsequence. For example, it's 300 bases. And here is a figure about trunk-based pipeline. We first consider about the conversional pipeline, where we read consider of 4 trunks, C1 to C4. And we do all of the base calling on the trunks. And after that, we assemble them into a read. And we do the quality control on the read. And then we do the read mapping on the read. In our trunk-based pipeline, we do the base calling. And at the same time, we do second base calling. We do the quality control of the first trunk and some computation of the read mapping of the first trunk. And then we pipeline them. And at the and we do the rest of the computation of the read mapping. And then we can save some cycles inside the trunk-based pipeline. And trunk-based pipeline increases the parallelism by overlapping the execution of different steps at the trunk granularity. And trunk-based pipeline reduces the intermediate data by computing on the data as soon as the data is generated, right? And trunk-based pipeline also provides the opportunities for early rejection, which is the technology that I will introduce later, by analyzing a read at the trunk granularity. Okay, then the second technique of the GenePIP is early rejection, where we stop the execution on useless reads as early as possible by using a small number of trunks to predict the usefulness of the read. So early rejection predict and eliminate the low quality and unmapped reads from the pipeline as early as possible. So here is steps of early rejection. First, we base call small number of trunks and check the average quality of the trunks. If it fails, then we stop analysis. If it passes, then we base call more trunks and map the base call trunks so far, check the mapping score. Fails, then we stop analysis. If it passes, then we base call all of the remaining trunks and execute the remaining computation in the read mapping. So the early rejection based on the trunk quality scores can predict the low quality reads using the trunk quality scores. And then early rejection based on the trunk mapping scores can predict the unmapped reads using the trunk mapping scores. We have more details in the paper to explain how to achieve these two early rejection. And next is the implementation of CP and ER. So actually, trunk-based pipeline and early rejection can be applied on different systems, not only in the processing in-memory systems. It can be applied on the CPU, GPU, and PIM. So basically, we implement CP and ER using PIM because PIM is more efficient to reduce the data movement between the genome analysis steps, meaning that we provide more opportunity to process the data as soon as possible and find out this data is useful or not as soon as possible, then reduce the computation and the data movement, right? So we also applied CPU and ER on CPU GPU and observed the speed up and energy savings, but not as much as the PIM, of course. So here is the implementation. I won't go through details, but the high-level idea is like we integrated them together, and we have different styles of the processing using memory and processing near memory inside this implementation. And PIM enables the fast data processing that we can analyze the data as soon as it generated by the previous steps and reduce the storage of intermediate data. Because if we kind of process the data when it's generated, we don't need to go through the memory hierarchy, right? And also tightly integrated the genome analysis steps, reduce the data movement and eliminates useless computation. So we evaluate, here's the evaluation methodology. We evaluate the performance, area, and power analysis. And here's the baselines, the CPU, GPU, and the optimistic integration of two PIM accelerators, which has proposed by the previous works and focus on the different operations like string matching operations. And we assume there's no data movement between the steps and assume the intermediate data cause no overhead. But actually, if you don't assume that, you cannot really integrate them because the overhead of this intermediate data storage is really large. So the data sets we use is E. coli and human data sets. So here is the result of the performance. GenPeep provides the 41 times and 8 times and 1.4 times speed up over the CPU, GPU, and the optimistic PIM. And both CP and ER are critical to the speed up. In the we show more results in the paper that these two techniques really contribute a lot to the speed up. And here is the energy efficiency results. And GenPeep provides the 32 times energy saving and 20 times energy saving, 1.37 energy saving over the CPU and GPU and the optimistic PIM. And more results showing that ER is especially critical to the energy saving because it's like reduce the analysis on the useless computation. So let me summarize a little bit of the first work. So GenPeep, we found a problem that the genome analysis pipeline has large data movement between genome analysis steps and a significant amount of wasted computation on useless data. And the goal is to tightly integrate the genome analysis steps to reduce the data movement between the steps and eliminate the computation on the useless data. So GenPeep is the first in-memory genome analysis accelerator that tightly integrates the analysis steps to enable the trunk-based pipeline and the new early rejection technique. And GenPeep outperforms the state-of-art software and hardware solutions, including CPU and GPU, and the optimistic of the PIM integration. Okay, do you have any questions regarding the first work?
I have like 2 questions, if it's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The first one was, to my understanding, the current pipelines are implemented on cloud for flexibility in CPU, GPU configurations as well as storage. But is GenPeep then currently just running locally?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's integrated in one chip. So basically, we don't need to go to the store the data and then go to the computation units. We just integrate one chip close to the sequencing machine and then do the ASIC things. So the one thing that using the GenPeep compared to the cloud things is that all of the things is ASIC, meaning that you cannot have flexibility for if you want to change the kind of steps, or so basically you need to follow the steps of the current genome analysis.
I see. And then my second follow-up question was about the early rejection stage. I think I saw that the chunks are analyzed based on the average of several chunks. But
Yes.
if that's the case, if there is an outlier of a really bad chunk and the other chunks are normal, wouldn't that not utilize the normal chunks and kind of waste that chunk analysis that has been preceded?
Yes, we do have the accuracy analysis inside the paper, more details that how do we choose the chunks when during the analysis. We actually don't choose the chunks we remove the quality of we do some statistics of the chunk quality analysis, and we don't choose the chunks of the beginning and end of the subsequence. We kind of evenly choose the chunks from the after we remove the beginning and the last chunks, and we evenly choose the chunks from the subsequence to ensure that the prediction is more accurate. And we do have this accuracy analysis, and it shows that there's a little bit accuracy drop. Sometimes it's like quite accurate. Sometimes there's only a little bit accuracy drop, and it's acceptable.
I see. Okay, thank you.
We can achieve this improvement and energy saving. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Mao. I would like to ask for the previous for this paper, you are saying that you use a quality score to determine whether you want to, as a matrix, to determine whether you want to do a early termination and early rejection. And how do you obtain this quality score matrix?
Oh,
Is
the
it in the
quality score
model?
is actually, yeah. So the quality score is actually very simple. It's kind of like if you look at the output file of the base calling. Base calling basically is neural network translation of the raw signals to the bases. And once they output the translation, they will have associated possibility, like so they translate into ACGTs. So for example, they have associated the scores for each translation. So for example, the A for these small raw signals is the possibility is 0.96, meaning that is with a high possibility it will be A. And so the output files of base calling is not only the ACGTs, but also associated with the with the scores of the translation. And when you calculate the scores, you just calculate the average scores. When you calculate the scores of the translation, you just calculate the average of all of the each base translation. Does it make sense? So it's basically the simple calculation, and it's very easy to be done inside the memory. It's not the complex one. Yeah.
So my concern is, do you trust so right now you are trusting that model is predicting a good quality score for you. So it actually depends on the model capability as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for the nanopore sequencing analysis, the errors comes from two sides. One is the machine itself, the sequencing machine itself. Another one is coming from the translation, right? So both of them can create errors. So that's why you need to read. So basically in the genome analysis, one subsequence, you not only sequence once, you sequence many times. And then you can kind of analyze, and also the cost of, so basically, for example, you sequence 30 times, the deeps is 30. And when you see one base, and you can judge it's arrows or it's not arrows. So when you're sequencing a lot of times, and this is time to kind of judge if it's an arrow or not.
Okay.
All the variation, right?
Okay,
There can be errors, there can be variations.
So there can be so I would say it's like you're suggesting that quality score is highly correlated with actual results, but it might not be the case all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay, maybe we can move to the next one, which is holistic data-centric architecture.
Yep.
Sorry?
No, I was just saying we can move ahead.
Okay. So it's the PIM architecture for the large language model. Okay. So here is the executive summary of PUPI. We observed that the large language model decoding kernels have different dynamically changing of computation and memory bandwidth demands at runtime. So the problem is that the existing heterogeneous large language model systems have two shortcomings. One is the static scheduling that fails to dynamically cater to changing kernel demands. And another one is to support only one type of processing in memory device with a certain computation throughput and memory bandwidth capacity. So the goal of PUPY is to design a heterogeneous system that caters to different and dynamically changing computation and memory demands in the large language model decoding. So the key idea is to enable online dynamic task scheduling on the heterogeneous architecture via the online identification of large language model decoding kernels properties. And key techniques is a new computing system called PUPY, where we dynamically have the dynamic large language model kernel scheduling to the most suitable hardware units at runtime, and the hybrid PIM units to meet the diverse large language model kernel demands. And the key results, PUPY performs the state-of-art PIM-enabled large language model computing system and a pure PIM system by 1.8 and 11.1 times speed up. So firstly, let me give you a background of large language model inference, where we have two basic stages. One is prefilling and one decoding. In the prefilling, we encode the input in parallel, and in the decoding, we generate output tokens in serial or parallel that we will discuss later. So here is that in the decoding, we generate this one is serial one by one, and we have all of the results here. So the decoder structure is like this. We have a lot of blocks inside it, and in each block, we have the QKV generation, multi-head attention, projection, and the feedforward networks. And attention kernels, it's kind of used encoded from the input tokens and have different data across the requests. So basically, the data is dependent on the request. And the fully connected kernels is pre-trained by the large language model training and used for token generation. And this data is kind of not dependent on the request. Okay. And so here is more background about serial and parallel decoding. And in the serial decoding, of course, we generate one token per process. And here, as you can see, we have low hardware utilization and low throughput because we generate one by one. Okay? And in parallel decoding, there are many parallel decodings. Like the first one is token level parallelism, where we have a request and we generate two tokens per process. And we have the request level parallelism, which we call ILP. We have two requests and we generate them in parallel. So both parallel decoding, they have a higher hardware utilization and higher throughput compared to the serial decoding. And then let's ask a question, do TLP and ILP benefit all kernels in LLM decoding? And we found three key observations. The first one is that large language model kernels have different computation and memory bandwidth demands across different ILP and TLP levels. And the memory bounded kernels have different computation demands depending on the kernel types. And the third one is large language kernels have dynamically changing ILP and TLP levels. So here are more details about the observation. The first one, we have the low-frame model of the LLM kernels with several ILP and TLP configurations on the GPU. And here is a result of different ILP. And here you can see we have the memory bound, attention, and FC layers. And we have the compute bound for the FC layers. And for the TLP, we have both memory bound and compute bound, right? So large language model kernels have different computation and memory bandwidth demands across different ILP and TLP levels. And here are more explanation. FC kernels benefits from ILP and TLP, and this more compute bound. And attention kernels is actually benefit more from the TLP. It's usually much smaller than the ILP, and it's memory bound. The second key observation here is the result from the previous slides, that even though all of these attention memory bound and FZ layers are also memory bound, but they actually kind of require different memory bandwidth, right here. And also at the same time, we this for the TLP result, we have the same thing. Even though they all memory bound, they require different kind of bandwidth in all computation computation abilities inside the PIM units. So the memory bound kernels also have different computation demands depending on the kernel type, right? So the third observation is that in the paper, we show more, we have more analysis of dynamic parallelism levels. And there's the initial ILP and the runtime ILP and TLP. So all of this can change the kind of like the parallelism levels and change the demands for the computation at the memory access. So we conclude that the LLM kernels have dynamically changing ILP and TLP levels. So previous PIM works for the large language model inference. We have the memory-centric computing device. For example, we have enabled PIM-enabled memory and also integrated with some GPU accelerator. And we run in the previous works, they run the attention level kernels on the PIM-enabled memory because mostly memory bound. And FC kernels, they map it to the computation-centric accelerator because it requires a lot of computation resources. And major shortcomings of previous works is that they statically, they kind of assign this task without considering the change inside the different requests or change inside the parallelism levels. So the static scheduling leads to suboptimal performance across different parallelism levels. And the second one is the memory-bound FC kernels and the attention kernels have varying computation and memory bandwidth demands. And the prior works support only one type of PIM device with a certain computation and memory bandwidth capacity. Because once you kind of like decide what kind of a type of a PIM that you use, you have can combine the integrate the units and processing units and the memory units in a certain way that in the end you cannot really change it, right? So basically, this is one shortcoming of the previous work. And so the goal of the PUPY is to design a heterogeneous system that caters to varying parallelism levels in a real-world large language inference with different and dynamically changing computation and memory demands. Okay. So the key idea of PUPY is to enable online dynamic task scheduling in a novel heterogeneous PIM-enabled architecture via the online identification of kernel properties in the large language model decoding. And the PUPY's key components, one is the hybrid PIM units to cater to different parallelism levels of FC and attention kernels, and dynamic large language kernel scheduling to cater to dynamically changing parallelism levels. So here is the overview of PUPY architecture. We have the high performance processor to handle the memory bound or compute bound FC kernels to execute the FC kernels and dynamically scheduling the tasks. And we have the attention kernels to handle the memory bound attentions. And here's another overview of PIM, the types of PIM. We have two types of PIM. One is FC PIMs, and one is attention PIMs. And hybrid PIM units can handle different memory bound and FC and attention kernels with different computational and memory demands. Okay, here are more details about inside each contribution inside this PUPY. The first one is high performance processor. We have the scheduler and the processing units and FCP. When the FC kernels are compute bound, it's assigned the FC kernels to PUs. And when the FC kernel are memory bound, it sends the FC kernel to FCP. And we have the hybrid PIM units, whereas FCP and attention PIM. FCP placed in the high performance processor and the attention PIM store the KV cache separated from the high performance processor. And here are more details about the hybrid PIM units. FT PIMs, there are more FPUs per bank, which is floating point processing units. And attention, it can do higher computation, provide higher computation capability to cater the FC kernels. And in the attention PIM, because it's more demanding for the memory units, so it has a higher memory capacity to cater the attention kernels. Okay? So the integration of the processing units and the bank units are different in these two types of PIMs. And we have the runtime scheduler for HAPI when this offline to identify the memory boundness threshold. And then online, we monitor the parallelism levels, which is ILP and TLP. And then we have the arithmetic intensity predictor to predict the arithmetic intensity of FC kernels and compare with the memory boundness threshold, and then schedule the FC kernels to map FC kernels to either FC PIM or PUs. And here there is evaluation methodology of PAPI. So for the performance and energy analysis, we're using the simulation similar in the ATT-ACC and Remediated 2. And the baselines is ATT-ACC, which is the state-of-art PIM architectures for the large language model. And we use the GPU plus the HBM PIM. Also, we compare with the PIM only, which is we use only the PIM device in the ATT-ACC. And the workloads, 3 transformer-based large language models, and the data sets is Dolly, creative writing tasks, and general QA tasks. So here's the result of performance. PAPI improves the performance by 1.8 times, 1.9 times, and 11.1 times compared to the ATT-ACC, GPU plus HBM PIM and PIM only. And here's the result of energy. PAPI improves the energy efficiency a lot compared to the ATT-ACC, GPU, and PIM only. Okay. So there are more details in the paper that you can check if you're interested in. And here is the QR code of the paper. And to conclude, so basically you find that large language model kernels have different computation and memory bandwidth demands crossing different IRP and TLP levels. And we find that the memory bound kernels exhibit different computation demands depending on kernel type. And large language model kernels have dynamically changing ILP and TLP levels. So we propose PAPI, which is a new PIM-enabled heterogeneous system design that caters to varying demands of kernels by scheduling them dynamically to computation-centric or processing units or the hybrid PIM units. And the key result, PAPI largely improved both performance and energy efficiency over the best prior PIM decoding system. Okay. And I also summarized the future research directions about the PIM and the ISP. So there are actually many things that I didn't mention in the previous slides, which is, first is the accuracy problems of data-centric architectures. Because there are maybe a lot of, not maybe, there are a lot of errors in the analog computing, especially when you want to scale it up to a big scale. And there are also limited bits of data formats supported. And second, there are more data-centric architectures to explore, such as more processing near memory using memory, processing near flash, and using flash microarchitectures. And heterogeneous data-centric architectures. For example, we can do both processing near memory, processing using memory, and we can do processing in memory and processing in storage at the same time, when it makes sense, like where to do the computation, right? And there's also other emerging data-centric architectures, such as quantum computing, because it's kind of like the store data at the same time processing the data. So data-centric architectures not really only the PIM and in-storage computing. And also the flexibility problem that also Sneha mentioned before. we do have these trade-offs of flexibility and performance and area overhead, right, inside. Not only the PIM or in-storage processing, I would like to say it's like really the trade-off that we do computer architecture designs. It's the art of trade-off, making trade-offs, right? And to support different goals in the specific domain. And the data-centric architectures for the portable devices, I think this is also very interesting and promising direction for both genome analysis and large language models, right? And sustainable data-centric architectures, of course. It's not only about the performance, right? And adapt to development of algorithms in modern applications. Because when we consider as like acceleration as ASIC thing, then we better need to consider the development of algorithm. We don't really want to design the architecture, and maybe when it's proved to be very useful, the algorithm already developed to maybe N generations, right? So we also need to study the algorithm. We really need to study the algorithm when we want to design the architecture for it. Okay, last but not least, please allow me to introduce my new group, our research group called CEL, which is System and Architecture for Intelligent Living. And our mission is to co-design the software and hardware to power the data-intensive AI and bioinformatics for healthier and happier and simpler daily life. And the key directions are computer architecture system, software hardware co-design, data-centric architectures, acceleration of data-intensive applications, emergent memory and storage technologies, and reliable architectures and systems. So I'm the group leader, and I'm currently assistant professor at King's College London. And before that, I was a postdoc researcher at ETH Zurich and group associate. Also, I did my PhD at Tsinghua University. And I'm teaching the logic design and hardware design. At the same time, I'm doing a lot of academic services, like presenting chairs of ERASIS and conference paper reviews. And here's the group members. I currently have 2 PhD students. They all working in the processing memory and in storage processing. And if you're interested to cooperate with them, you can just simply send them an email. Yeah, that's all. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you so much, Hayo. This was great. I know people need to probably run off for their midterms, etc. But if you have any questions, feel free to stay back, ask questions. And Hayo, do you have like a few minutes? I want to be mindful of your time as well.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Yeah. So any questions? Yes, Raida.
Hi, thanks for lecturing this morning. I was curious because you had 2 examples, this genome sequencing and LLM inferencing are obviously good examples of use cases for PIM. I think they probably share. You said a limitation of PIM is that it doesn't have as robust a variety of logic operations that it can do. What else do those 2 algorithms share? And then in general, what makes an algorithm a good one for in-memory computing?
Oh, that's really a good question. So basically for in-memory computing, because you kind of integrate some processing units to the memory or using the memory to do the computations. And the computation needs to be very simple because the computation ability of the processors integrated near to the memory is quite limited. The area overhead is, you need to consider about the area overhead, right? You definitely don't want to put the large CPU connected to the memory. That's kind of a waste, and also it occupies a lot of area. So basically, the things need to be simple and highly parallelism. So, for example, you kind of in the genome analysis, you compare one string against a lot of strings. This is highly parallelism because each string comparison doesn't depend on the previous step, right? It can be do in a really highly parallel way, and also each computation is simple, just like comparison. It's not, it need to be a lot of computation. So these kind of characteristics of the operation are very can benefit a lot from the processing memory, because it can benefit the internal high bandwidth, at the same time the simple computation. So compared to the centric computation that you need to fetch the data from the memory to the CPUs and only do a very simple operation and then need to store it back, right? So these are generally the beneficials for processing memory.
Thank you.
I think we have a question from the class. I think it's Eugene.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I cannot really hear clearly.
It's probably just come near the laptop.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear now.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Professor Moore, for the next talk. And I have a question about the basic concept of processing near memory and 3D processing near memory. So I'm quite curious, as there's a slide mentioning processing near memory, and usually people use near DIMM processing. It is also what those commercial hardware use, like UpMem. But nowadays there are 3D processing near memory. I'm quite curious about if there is new architectural problems brought up by 3D processing near memory compared with the original processing near memory. Because I know like the bandwidth and the latency becomes much better. And the architectural problem I can think of about the 3D processing near memory is about like the locality problem for TS width. But I think it is quite similar to the original processing near memory. Do you think there are new architectural problems brought up by it?
You mean the hardware problems, right?
Some
architectural
architectural problems.
Sorry?
Some architectural problems.
Architectural problems of the 3D integration compared to the 2D?
Yeah, compared to just the normal processing near memory, near DIMM processing.
Okay, so the first thing is I can think about is like the hardware things, because you can kind of integrate in a 3D way. So the thermal problem is the biggest problem when you integrate in a very dense, and when you do, you cannot really integrate a lot of processing units on the logic die, because the temperature will be the biggest problem, and the reliability, right? This is a problem for the hardware. And for the software, of course, there's a different scheduling problem, data mapping problem, and at the same time, I mean, there's maybe there will be some bottleneck shifts, because for the 2D, the bandwidth is the bottleneck, and for the 3D, since we have really high bandwidth for the memory accessing, maybe now the bottleneck of inside the whole architecture will shift to the processing again. Does it make sense for you?
Oh, it really makes sense.
Yeah.
So the data flow might be quite different because the bottleneck is different.
Yeah, exactly. Then you need to more deal with the processing now, design the processors inside the 3D integration.
Yeah, but except for this problem, the other things we could currently think of is still like the physical constraints, and also the bandwidth and the latency is much better. And
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Do we have any other questions in class, those online?
Hi, Dr. Mao.
Yes.
I have another question. So basically, we have been seeing that there have been a lot of research with processing in memories, and so far there has not been that much industrial adoption of this technology. What do you think that might be the biggest obstacles right now?
Yeah, because I think this is really big change of the computer architecture. It's not really kind of incremental thing. For the processing near memory, there are some industrial products because it doesn't really change a lot to the memory cells and memory structures. You can have some like programming changes, also kind of very fewer compared to the processing using memory. There are some research or prototypes of the processing using memory in IBM, for example. They're also doing some processing using phase change memory. But the problem is that the reliability issue and the scale things of when you want to scale it to support a very large data set, and the error will be kind of accumulate. And I think there's many aspects that processing using memory is it's really at its early stage. It doesn't really have the kind of like motivation now to let's say make it commercial, but I think it's really huge, big potential for it to be commercial products later. But before that, we really need to design a lot of things and make a good trade-off between the performance and also the flexibility to support the more and more applications. Yeah.
Okay, I am aware that the analog problem errors that you're mentioning exist in emerging technologies such as like ReRAM for that. I'm not sure how are these problems like in, let's say, SRAM and flash processing memory. And yeah.
So that's a really good question. So for SRAM, I don't really know the error things because I haven't done any research about SRAM. But I heard that for SRAM, the issue is more like the area overhead of the computing units integrated to SRAM, because SRAM is already has a really large area overhead on chip, right? And if you integrate more computation units, then area overhead will become bigger. So that's the biggest problem I heard from SRAM side. And for the memory and the flash, I can answer more because I have more experience in this. And for the main memory, we do have some work that test on the real chip about the error things and how we can overcome those challenges, but it's still like really specific to one application. And for the flash, it has the same problem. And the flash is more limited compared to the main memory because the endurance problem of the flash cells, it's kind of lifetime is much lower compared to either the RAM or the DRAM, right? So the problem is bigger of the processing using flash, but this also still works like doing processing using flash as it's quite like powerful if it's become successful. At the same time, the technology is also developing, right? Not only the architecture, the technology of the flash and also different materials. And so we need to kind of think also in thinking about the development of the technology, different in emerging memories. Technology.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. Any other questions? I guess we're done. I'll just